The heavy oak doors of the St. Jude Cathedral didn't just open. They groaned under the weight of a secret that was about to incinerate 3 lives. My best friend, Chloe, stood at the altar in a lace veil that cost more than my car, her hand trembling as she slipped a gold band onto the finger of the man who had promised to love me until his last breath. Mark didn't look at the priest. His eyes were locked on the small, rhythmic pulse in Chloe's neck. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the bouquet. I simply adjusted the silk strap of my black dress and walked toward the front row, where a man sat with a silver-headed cane and eyes that held the chill of an open grave. Is the seat taken, Lorenzo? I whispered. The man who controlled the city's docks and half its politicians shifted his cane. He didn't look at the bride. He looked at me, his gaze tracing the jagged line of a fresh heartbreak he knew I was hiding. For you, Sienna, Lorenzo rasped, the front row is a requirement. 30 minutes ago, I was the woman in the white dress, hidden in the vestry, clutching a positive pregnancy test that felt like a ticking bomb. Now, I am the woman sitting next to the only man Mark is truly terrified of. Lorenzo isn't just a billionaire with a penchant for sharp suits and silent exits. He is the head of the Moretti syndicate, a man who turns blood into gold. And he is Mark's father. To understand how I went from the discarded bride to the woman holding the leash of the city's most dangerous man, you have to look at the 3 liters of champagne Chloe poured down my throat the night of my bachelorette party, the night I woke up alone while she was in my fiancé's bed. I leaned closer to Lorenzo, the scent of expensive tobacco and cedarwood clinging to his skin. He thinks he won, I murmured, nodding toward Mark. Lorenzo's hand, scarred from a life of decisions that required no mercy, tightened on his cane. My son has a habit of taking things that don't belong to him. He lacks the discipline to understand that some prizes come with a death sentence. Mark spotted me then. His face drained of color, the triumphant smirk he'd shared with Chloe curdling into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. Chloe followed his gaze, her grip on the lilies tightening until the stems snapped. They expected me to be at home, crying into a pillow. They didn't expect me to be the +1 of the man who could strip them of their inheritance with a single phone call. I stood up as the priest announced them husband and wife. The applause was hollow, echoing against the marble floors. I didn't head for the exit. I walked straight to the altar. Mark stepped back, his heels clicking against the stone. Chloe tried to square her shoulders, but her chin wobbled. Congratulations, I said, my voice cutting through the hushed murmurs of the elite. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the pregnancy test. I didn't hand it to Mark. I handed it to Lorenzo, who had followed me with a slow, deliberate gait that made the air in the cathedral feel heavy. Lorenzo took the plastic stick, his eyes narrowing as he read the 2 pink lines. He didn't look at me. He looked at his son, and for the first time in the 3 years I'd known Mark, I saw him shiver. A Moretti heir, Lorenzo said, his voice a low thrum that vibrated in my chest. Born from a woman you discarded for a traitor. Dad, it's not, Sienna is lying, Mark stammered, his hands fluttering like trapped birds. Lorenzo didn't raise his voice. He stepped into Mark's personal space, the tip of his silver cane resting on Mark's polished shoe. Sienna isn't just the mother of my grandchild, Mark. She's my new business partner. And as of 5 minutes ago, she's the one who decides if you still have a seat at the table. Chloe's jaw dropped. What? Lorenzo, you can't be serious. We just got married. Lorenzo turned his head slowly, his gaze so cold it seemed to frost the air. A marriage built on theft is just a contract waiting to be breached. Get out of the church. Both of you. He didn't wait for them to move. He turned to me, offering his arm with a courtly grace that felt like a threat. We have a dinner to attend, Sienna. There are people you need to meet. People who need to know that the Moretti name now carries your weight. As we walked down the aisle, the guests parted like the Red Sea. I could feel Mark's eyes burning into my back, a mixture of rage and desperation. I didn't look back. I didn't care about the man I'd lost. I cared about the power I'd just gained. But as we reached the heavy oak doors, Lorenzo's grip on my arm tightened just a fraction too much. One thing, Sienna, he whispered, his lips brushing my ear. In my world, loyalty isn't rewarded. It's expected. If you ever look back at him, I'll make sure you never see the light of day again. He pushed the doors open and the blinding sunlight of the city hit us. Parked at the curb was a fleet of black SUVs, men in dark glasses standing at attention. Lorenzo led me toward the lead car, but before the driver could open the door, a muffled explosion rocked the street. A car 3 blocks down went up in a ball of orange flame, and the scream started. Lorenzo didn't flinch. He just looked at his watch. The first warning, he muttered. It seems my son has friends I didn't know about. He shoved me into the back seat and slammed the door. As the SUV roared to life, I looked out the tinted window and saw Mark standing on the cathedral steps, his phone to his ear, a look of grim satisfaction on his face that told me the wedding was just the beginning of the war. Mark wasn't a player. He was a pawn, and I had just realized that Lorenzo hadn't picked me because of the baby. He picked me because I was the only person who knew where Mark hid the ledgers. The car sped through the narrow streets of the North End, tires screeching against the pavement. Lorenzo sat in the dark corner of the leather seat, his face illuminated only by the passing streetlights. He wasn't looking at the fire behind us. He was staring at the lead-line box bolted to the floor of the vehicle. "The baby," I said, my hand resting on my stomach. "You knew before I told you." "I knew the moment you walked into the vestry 3 weeks ago," Lorenzo replied. "I have doctors on my payroll, Sienna. I have the air you breathe on my payroll. Did you really think you could hide a Moretti from me?" The car swerved violently, throwing me against the door. A black motorcycle was weaving through traffic behind us, the rider clad in all-black carbon fiber, a submachine gun slung over his shoulder. The driver of our SUV, a man with a jagged scar across his nose named Dante, began to weave through the delivery trucks. "Give me the phone," Lorenzo commanded. I handed it over. He didn't check my messages. He tapped a sequence into the dial pad, and the screen turned into a thermal map of the city. Tiny red dots were converging on our location. Mark's friends weren't just thugs. They were professionals. If you think a woman shouldn't have to choose between the man she loved and the man who can keep her child alive, hit the like button so this story reaches someone who needs to hear it. Dante slammed on the brakes as a semi-truck jackknifed it across the bridge ahead. We were trapped. The motorcycle rider slid his bike to a halt 50 yards back, the kickstand clicking into place. He didn't aim at the tires. He aimed at the reinforced glass of the rear window. "Get down," Lorenzo roared, throwing his heavy frame over mine. The glass didn't shatter, it was armored, but the impact of the high-velocity round sounded like hammers hitting a drum. Lorenzo pulled a compact pistol from his waistband and rolled the window down just 2 inches. He didn't fire wildly. He waited for the rider to reload. In that split second of silence, Lorenzo fired twice. The rider's helmet erupted in a spray of gray and red, and the bike tumbled into the river below. Lorenzo sat back up, smoothing his silk tie as if he'd just finished a light lunch. Mark always did have a flair for the dramatic. He forgets that I taught him how to aim. "Why is he doing this?" I gasped, the smell of cordite filling the car. "He's your son. He's a businessman, Sienna. And right now, you are a liability to his new merger with the Russians. Chloe didn't just steal your groom, she brought him a dowry of blood." The SUV lurched forward, driving over the sidewalk to bypass the truck. We sped toward the docks, the industrial cranes rising like skeletal giants against the darkening sky. This was Lorenzo's territory. The smell of salt and diesel fuel was thick here. We pulled into a massive, unmarked warehouse, the steel shutters closing behind us with a finality that made my heart stutter. Lorenzo stepped out of the car, his cane clicking on the concrete. He didn't help me out. He walked toward a heavy iron door at the back of the facility. "Dante, take her to the safe room. I have a phone call to make to Moscow." Dante grabbed my arm, his grip firm but not bruising. He led me through a maze of shipping containers. We passed a crate that had been pried open. Inside were rows of assault rifles, their steel barrels glinting. "You're not just a Mafia boss," I whispered, looking at Lorenzo's retreating back. "You're an arms dealer." Lorenzo stopped and turned, his eyes reflecting the harsh overhead lights. "I am a provider, Sienna. I provide the world with the tools it needs to settle its grievances. Tonight, my grievance is with my own blood." Dante pushed me into a small, windowless room. The walls were lined with monitors showing every angle of the warehouse. On the center screen, I saw a black sedan pull up to the perimeter gate. The passenger door opened and Chloe stepped out. She wasn't wearing her wedding dress anymore. She was wearing tactical gear, a headset nestled in her blonde curls. She looked directly into the camera and smiled. She held up a remote detonator. "Sienna," she said, her voice crackling through the room's speakers. "I hope you like the front row. Because the finale is about to bring the house down." The screen went black as the first explosion tore through the warehouse's north wall. The floor buckled beneath me, sending a rack of servers crashing into the wall. Smoke, thick and smelling of burnt plastic, swirled through the room. I lunged for the door, but the electronic lock was dead. I was trapped in a 4x4 concrete box while the world outside turned into a furnace. "Dante!" I screamed, pounding my fists against the steel. No answer. Only the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of a heavy-caliber machine gun somewhere in the rafters. I turned to the monitors. Only one was still flickering. It showed the main floor where Lorenzo stood alone in the center of the loading bay. He wasn't holding a gun. He was holding his cane, leaning on it with a terrifying stillness as three men in masks circled him. Chloe walked into the frame, her boots clicking on the concrete, the sound amplified by the remaining audio feed. "Where is she, Lorenzo? Give me the ledgers and I'll make sure the baby gets a quick end." Lorenzo didn't blink. "You were always the ambitious one, Chloe. Mark didn't choose you. You hunted him." "I saw an opportunity," she spat, leveling a suppressed pistol at his chest. "And you're the only thing standing between me and the docks. Now where is the girl?" I looked around the room, my eyes landing on a ventilation grate near the ceiling. It was narrow, choked with dust. I dragged the heavy desk toward the wall, the metal screeching against the floor. My fingers clawed at the screws, breaking 2 nails before the grate finally popped free. I scrambled up, the rough metal of the duct scraping my shoulders as I squeezed through. The air in the duct was hot, vibrating with the force of the battle below. I crawled toward the sound of voices, my heart hammering against my ribs. I reached a slanted vent that overlooked the loading bay. Below, Mark had emerged from the shadows. He looked disheveled, his wedding tuxedo torn at the shoulder, a smear of soot on his forehead. "Dad, stop," Mark said, his voice cracking. "Just tell her where they are. We don't have to do this." "You already did it, Mark," Lorenzo replied. "The moment you let her into the inner circle, you signed your own death warrant." Chloe rolled her eyes and pulled the trigger. The bullet hit the concrete inches from Lorenzo's foot. "The next one goes in your knee, old man. Talk." "The ledgers aren't in the warehouse," Lorenzo said, his voice eerily calm. "They're with the only person you didn't think to search. The woman you thought was too broken to fight back." Every eye in the room turned toward the safe room I had just escaped. If you believe that a woman's greatest strength is the one her enemies underestimate, drop a like so this story reaches the fighters. I didn't wait. I kicked the vent cover open and dropped. I didn't land gracefully, I crashed onto a pile of burlap sacks, the air leaving my lungs in a sharp gasp. Mark spun around, his gun shaking. Chloe's face twisted into a snarl of pure hatred. "Sienna," she hissed. "I should have killed you in the vestry." "You should have tried," I rasped, standing up and reaching into the waistband of my dress. I didn't have a gun. I had the ledger, the physical book Lorenzo had slipped into my clutch at the church while everyone was watching the bride. "Give it to me," Chloe commanded, stepping toward me. "One step closer and I drop it into the oil vat," I said, nodding toward the simmering tank of industrial lubricant behind me. "You want the docks? You want the Russian merger? Without this, you're just 2 traitors with a pile of debt." Mark took a step forward, his eyes pleading. "Sienna, please. We can still make this work. We can be a family." "We were never a family, Mark. We were a transaction." Lorenzo moved then. It was a blur of silver and wood. He swung his cane, the heavy head connecting with Chloe's wrist. Her gun clattered to the floor. Before she could react, he pivoted, the tip of the cane revealing a hidden blade that he pressed against Mark's throat. "The transaction is closed," Lorenzo said. But Chloe wasn't done. She lunged for the fallen pistol. I didn't think. I grabbed a heavy metal wrench from the nearby workbench and swung with everything I had. It connected with the side of her head with a sickening thwack. She crumpled to the floor, motionless. Mark stared at his bride, then at the blade at his neck. "Dad, please?" "Go," Lorenzo whispered. "If I ever see your face in this city again, I won't use a blade. I'll use the docks you wanted so badly to bury you." Mark didn't look at me. He didn't look at Chloe. He turned and ran into the night, disappearing into the fog. Lorenzo retracted the blade into his cane and looked at me. He looked at the ledger in my hand, then at the wrench I was still clutching. A slow, grim smile spread across his face. "You have the discipline, Sienna. Perhaps the Moretti name is in better hands than I thought." He walked toward the exit, the warehouse around us groaning as the fire took hold of the upper floors. "Come. The Russians are waiting. And they don't like to be kept in the dark." I followed him, the ledger pressed against my chest. But as we reached the car, I saw a shadow move in the wreckage. Chloe wasn't dead. She was sitting up, her eyes wide and glassy, reaching for a burner phone she'd hidden in her boot. She pressed a button, and the warehouse's secondary fuel tanks began to hiss. The air turned into a wall of pressure. I was thrown forward, the asphalt scraping my palms as the world behind us erupted into a secondary sun. The roar was so loud it was silent. A vacuum that sucked the oxygen from my lungs. I rolled onto my back, the heat singing the ends of my hair. The warehouse was a skeleton of white-hot steel, the sky above it turning a bruised purple with smoke. Lorenzo was already on his feet, his cane planted firmly in the gravel. He didn't look back at the inferno. He was looking at the black SUVs screaming toward us from the main road. But they weren't his. These were white SUVs with Federal Bureau of Investigation stenciled on the sides. "The ledger, Sienna," Lorenzo commanded, his voice a low vibration. "Destroy it. Now." "If I destroy it, we have no leverage," I argued, the smell of my own burnt skin sharp in my nostrils. "If they find it on you, you're a co-conspirator. Destroy it or the baby grows up in a cage." I looked at the book. It was a decade of blood, names of senators, and the locations of offshore accounts. It was my protection. It was also my death warrant. I looked at the flaming wreckage of the warehouse. I ran toward a piece of burning timber and thrust the book into the heart of the fire. The leather curled and blackened, the pages turning into glowing orange flakes that danced away on the wind. Lorenzo grabbed my arm and pulled me toward a hidden hatch in the concrete pier. The water. Now. We dropped into the freezing dark of the harbor just as the first sirens reached the pier. The water was oily and tasted of salt and diesel. We stayed beneath the wooden pilings, our heads barely above the surface, as boots thundered on the planks above us. "Where is she?" a voice boomed. "Agent Miller, the man who had been hunting Lorenzo for 20 years. Check the perimeter. No one leaves this pier." We waited for 3 hours in the dark, the cold seeping into my marrow until I couldn't feel my legs. Lorenzo held onto a rusted pipe with one hand and kept his other arm around my waist, keeping my head above the rising tide. He didn't say a word. He didn't even seem to be breathing. When the lights finally faded and the sirens moved into the distance, he pulled me up onto a small hidden concrete ledge. I slumped against the wall, my teeth chattering so hard I thought they'd break. "Why didn't you leave me?" I whispered. "You could have swum away an hour ago." Lorenzo leaned back, his eyes reflecting the distant city lights. "Because you did what my son couldn't. You burned your bridge to save the house. That makes you a Moretti, Sienna. Whether you want to be or not." He pulled a small waterproof pouch from his inner pocket. Inside was a single gold key and a map coordinates written in ink. "This is the true legacy. The ledger was a distraction. This is the key to the vault in Zurich where the real power is kept." He handed it to me. "I'm too old to start again. But you have a future to build." "Where are you going?" "To finish what I started. Miller won't stop until he sees a body. Tonight he'll find one." He stood up, his silver-headed cane missing, his silk suit ruined. He looked like a king who had lost his kingdom but found his soul. He leaned down and kissed my forehead, a gesture so tender it felt like a goodbye. If you believe that a mother's love can build an empire from the ashes, drop a like so the algorithm knows the war isn't over. He stepped back into the black water and disappeared without a splash. I was alone. I crawled out of the harbor at dawn, a ghost in a torn black dress. I walked through the sleeping city until I reached a payphone. I didn't call the police. I didn't call Mark. I dialed the number on the back of the gold key. "Zurich," a voice answered on the third ring. "Identification, please." "Sienna Moretti," I said, my voice as hard as the steel vault I was about to open. "Welcome home, Mrs. Moretti. Your flight is waiting." I looked at the sunrise. The wedding was over. The groom was gone. The boss was a memory. But as I touched my stomach, I knew that the Real story was just beginning. 6 months later, the doors of the Zurich private bank swung open. I walked out into the crisp mountain air, a coat draped over my shoulders, a team of 6 men in suits following 2 paces behind me. My stomach was a heavy, proud curve beneath my silk dress. A black car waited at the curb. The driver stepped out, Dante. He looked at me and nodded. "The Russians are in the boardroom, Sienna. They're expecting a negotiation." I stepped into the car and looked at the mountain peaks. "Tell them there is no negotiation. There is only the Moretti way." I didn't look back. I had dated the boss, I had burned the evidence, and now I was the one holding the cane. Subscribe if you want to see the rise of the new Moretti empire. If this journey from victim to queen inspired you, hit the like button and leave a comment. Empire. The Zurich air was a cold blade, but it didn't bite as deep as the silence in the boardroom. The 12 men sitting around the table, the heads of the Volkov line, didn't see a woman. They saw an obstacle. At the head of the table sat Viktor Volkov, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from the frozen earth of Siberia. He didn't rise when I entered. He didn't even stop cleaning his fingernails with a pocket knife. "Sienna," Victor said, his voice a low, gravelly vibration. You have the key. You have the vault. But you do not have the blood. In our world, the ghost of Lorenzo Moretti cannot protect a woman who has no shadow. I didn't sit. I walked to the window looking out at the pristine Swiss streets. Blood is just a liquid, Victor. It spills easily. I have the accounts. I have the routing numbers for the shipments currently sitting in the port of Odessa. If I don't enter a code into my phone every 6 hours, those ships don't just stop. They explode. The scratching of the knife stopped. Victor looked up, his pale eyes narrowing. The other men shifted, their expensive wool coats rustling like dry leaves. They had expected a girl playing dress-up with her father-in-law's legacy. They found a strategist holding a detonator. You are bluffing, one of the younger Volkovs sneered. Lorenzo would never give a civilian that kind of leverage. I stopped being a civilian the night my best friend and my fiancé tried to turn me into a charcoal drawing, I replied. I leaned over the table, my palms flat on the polished mahogany. Lorenzo didn't give me leverage. He gave me a choice. And I chose to be the woman who ends you if you don't fall in line. Victor closed his knife with a sharp click. And what do you want, Mrs. Moretti? A seat at the table? I want the table gone, I said. From now on, the Moretti-Volkov merger is a ghost. We move into tech, into infrastructure, into things that don't require us to look over our shoulders in a cathedral. You keep your territories, but the funding goes through me. And the first person who tries to bypass my authority gets their entire offshore portfolio liquidated into a charity for retired FBI agents. If you believe that the smartest person in the room is the one everyone thinks is the weakest, hit the like button so Sienna's power grows. The room was silent for a full minute. Then Victor stood up. He didn't reach for his gun. He reached for a crystal decanter of vodka and poured 2 glasses. He pushed one toward me. To the new order, he said. I took the glass, but I didn't drink. To the survivors. As I walked out of the boardroom, Dante was waiting by the elevator. His hand was inside his jacket, his eyes scanning the corridor. How did it go? They're terrified, I said, stepping into the lift. Which means they'll try to kill me within 48 hours. Dante, I need you to find Mark. He's in Brazil using a fake name. Don't touch him. Just make sure he knows I'm watching. And Chloe? Chloe is a different problem. She survived the warehouse, Dante. My sources say she's been seen in London talking to the Interpol task force. She's looking for immunity in exchange for my head. The elevator doors opened into the lobby. A man in a gray suit was standing by the fountain, reading a newspaper. He didn't look up, but as we passed, he tucked a small, white envelope into the pocket of my coat. I didn't stop. I waited until we were in the armored SUV to open it. Inside was a single photograph. It was a picture of me taken 10 minutes ago, through the crosshairs of a high-powered rifle. On the back, written in elegant, familiar cursive, were 3 words. Happy anniversary, BFF. She's here, I whispered, the paper crinkling in my hand. If you think Chloe is the ultimate villain who just won't stay down, drop a like so the algorithm warns Sienna. Subscribe to see the final showdown between the bride and the BFF. Dante gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. We need to get to the safe house. Now. No, I said, looking at the photo. She wants me to run. She wants me to hide like a frightened girl. We're going to the opera. Tonight is the premiere of Tosca. It's where the architect's daughter is making her debut. If Chloe wants a stage, I'll give her the biggest one in Zurich. The night was a blur of velvet and gold. I wore a gown the color of a fresh bruise, my hair pinned back with diamonds that felt like ice against my scalp. Dante was a shadow in a tuxedo, his eyes never leaving the high balconies of the opera house. In the middle of the second act, the seat beside me, which I had left empty, was suddenly occupied. The scent of lilies, Chloe's wedding flowers, filled the air. You look tired, Sienna, Chloe whispered, her voice a jagged edge in the dark. Being the boss doesn't suit your complexion. And being a snitch doesn't suit your health, I replied, not turning my head. The sniper missed, Chloe. You're getting sloppy. He didn't miss. He was sending a message. I don't want you dead yet. I want you to watch as I take back everything you stole. The money, the name, and eventually the baby. I turned then, my gaze locking onto hers. She looked different. Her face was scarred from the fire, hidden beneath a thick layer of makeup, her eyes filled with a manic, flickering light. The baby isn't a trophy, Chloe. And I'm not the girl you used to push around in high school. If you look at my child, I won't kill you. I'll make you wish you had died in that warehouse. Chloe leaned in, her lips inches from my ear. The police are outside, Sienna. I told them about the Zurich key. I told them about the Volkovs. In 5 minutes this building will be surrounded. Give me the key and I'll tell them you were forced into it. I'll be the hero. You'll just be the victim again. I smiled. It was a cold, empty thing. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the gold key. I held it up between us, the gold glinting in the dim light of the stage. You want it? Take it. She reached for it, her fingers trembling with greed. But as her hand closed over the metal, I leaned in. It's a replica, Chloe. The real key is already on a plane to Washington. I made a deal with Miller an hour ago. I gave him the Council of 12 in exchange for my immunity. And do you know who I put at the top of the list as the mastermind? Chloe's face drained of color. No. I told them you were the one who organized the warehouse fire to eliminate the competition. I told them Mark was your puppet. And since you're the one who called them here tonight, you're the one they're looking for. The doors at the back of the theater burst open. Blue and red lights reflected off the gold leaf of the ceiling. FBI. Nobody move. I stood up, smoothing my dress. Goodbye, Chloe. I'd say we should do lunch, but I don't think they allow outside catering in federal prison. I walked past the agents, my head held high. Dante met me at the side exit. We stepped out into the night, the sound of the opera continuing behind us, a tragic crescendo echoing through the streets. Is it over? Dante asked as the car pulled away. I looked at the gold key in my hand, the real one. For them it's over. For us. I touched my stomach, feeling a tiny rhythmic kick. For us, the empire is just beginning. The sirens faded into a rhythmic pulse behind us as we crossed the border into the French Alps. Chloe's screams of betrayal were nothing more than a memory now, muffled by the heavy soundproofing of the armored Bentley. Dante drove with a predatory focus, his eyes flicking between the road and the rearview mirror. The Volkovs won't wait for a funeral, Dante said, his voice cutting through the hum of the engine. They saw you walk out of that opera house while the feds swarmed their associates. They think you sold them out along with Chloe. Let them think it, I replied, staring at the jagged peaks of the mountains. Fear is a better shield than loyalty. They won't move until they know exactly how much I told Miller. And by then I'll be behind the walls of the Citadel. The Citadel was Lorenzo's final secret, a fortress carved into the limestone cliffs of the Haute Savoie. It wasn't a home, it was a vault with a heartbeat. As we climbed the winding roads, the temperature dropped, the air turning thin and sharp. If you believe that a woman's greatest weapon isn't a gun, but the information she keeps hidden, hit the like button so Sienna stays one step ahead. We reached the gate, a slab of reinforced steel disguised as an old winery entrance. Dante placed his palm on the scanner. The gate groaned open, revealing a tunnel lit by cold, recessed LEDs. Inside, the air smelled of ozone and ancient stone. I stepped out of the car, my heels echoing in the cavernous space. This was where the Moretti Empire was meant to survive a nuclear winter. On the center console of the command room, a single red light was blinking. Someone is trying to access the Zurich accounts, Dante said, his fingers flying across a keyboard. They have the master bypass code. Only 2 people ever had that. Lorenzo, I whispered. And Mark. The screen flickered and a video feed stabilized. It wasn't Mark. It was a man sitting in a darkened room, his face obscured by the brim of a fedora. He looked up and the silver head of a cane caught the light. Lorenzo? My voice was a ghost in the room. Not quite, Sienna. The voice came through the speakers. It was younger, smoother, and dripping with a poison I recognized. It was Mark. He had found the one thing Lorenzo loved more than power. His image. Mark had reconstructed himself, using the shadow of his father to haunt me. The wedding was a tragedy, the warehouse was a farce, Mark said, leaning into the light. He had a scar running through his eyebrow now, a gift from the warehouse fire. But this is the reckoning. I'm not in Brazil, Sienna. I'm in the one place you never thought to look. I'm already inside the Citadel. The lights in the command room turned a violent, flashing red. If you believe that the dead past never stays buried, drop a like so the algorithm warns Sienna. Subscribe to see if the mother or the son survives the Citadel. The heavy blast doors behind us slammed shut with a boom that shook the floor. Dante pulled his weapon, spinning to face the dark corners of the room. From the shadows of the server racks, Mark stepped out, holding a detonator that looked like a simple car key. You burned the ledger, Mark said, his voice echoing. But I have the memory. I grew up at his feet, Sienna. I know every back door he built into this world. You're sitting in his seat, but you're wearing a crown of glass. I stood my ground, my hand protective over my stomach. You'd kill your own child just to win a game your father already lost? Mark's gaze faltered for a fraction of a second, his eyes sliding to my waist. In that moment of hesitation, I didn't reach for a gun. I reached for the terminal behind me and entered the final sequence Lorenzo had whispered in the harbor. "The Citadel isn't a vault, Mark," I said, my voice steady as the monitors began to scroll with white text on a black background. "It's a trap. Lorenzo knew you'd come here if he died. He knew you couldn't resist the throne." The floor beneath Mark began to hum. A glass partition slid into place, separating us. "What are you doing?" Mark screamed, slamming his fist against the reinforced glass. "I'm fulfilling the contract," I said. "The Moretti name ends with me. And the power? It goes back to the people you robbed." I hit the final key. The screen read, "Asset distribution complete. Total balance, $0. I had just liquidated the largest private fortune in Europe into 10,000 microgrants for the families destroyed by the syndicate. If you believe that true power is the ability to walk away from a throne, hit the like button and leave a comment. Freedom. Mark fell to his knees as he watched the numbers vanish. He had the fortress, but the treasury was empty. He was the king of a graveyard. Dante opened the emergency bypass door. We walked out into the crisp mountain air, the sun finally rising over the peaks. I looked back at the fortress, a cold stone monument to a dead world. "Where to now, Mrs. Moretti?" Dante asked. I looked at the road ahead, a path that didn't lead to a vault or a boardroom. "Somewhere quiet," I said. "Somewhere where the only name anyone knows is mine." The bride was gone. The boss was a memory. But the woman was finally free. The wind off the Alps carried the scent of pine and the cold, metallic tang of the empire I had just turned to ash. Mark was still trapped behind the glass of the Citadel, screaming at monitors that showed nothing but zeros. He had the crown, but the gold had evaporated. Dante led me toward a small, unmarked helicopter hidden in a clearing a mile from the fortress. "The Volkovs are already moving," Dante said, his voice tight as he checked his watch. "They don't care about the money anymore. They care about the insult. You didn't just rob them, you made them look like fools." I climbed into the cabin, the leather seats still smelling of Lorenzo's expensive cologne. "Let them come. A man with nothing to lose is dangerous, but a woman with nothing to hide is invincible." As we lifted off, the Citadel looked like a jagged tooth against the white peaks. Suddenly the radio crackled to life. It wasn't the Volkovs. It wasn't the FBI. It was a voice that sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a deep, dark well. "You were always his favorite, Sienna," the voice whispered. "But Lorenzo didn't tell you about the 13th node." I froze. The Council of 12 had been the target. I had never heard of a 13th. If you believe that the deepest secrets are buried beneath the ones we think we've solved, hit the like button so Sienna finds the truth before it finds her. Dante's eyes widened as the helicopter's navigation system began to spin wildly. We weren't flying toward the coast anymore. The controls had been hijacked. We were being pulled toward a private estate on the shores of Lake Como, a place that didn't appear on any map. "The 13th node isn't a person," Dante hissed, fighting the joystick. "It's an AI. Lorenzo built a digital ghost to manage the fallout if the family ever fell. It's not just a program, it's his mind, uploaded and hungry." The helicopter touched down with a jarring thud on a marble helipad. The estate was silent, the gardens manicured to a terrifying perfection. As I stepped out, the front doors of the villa opened. Standing there wasn't a mobster or a soldier. It was a girl no older than 7 holding a tablet. She looked up at me with eyes that were a piercing, familiar slate gray. "Hello, Sienna," the girl said, her voice perfectly synthesized to match Lorenzo's cadence. "Grandfather said you'd be the one to bring the key back." I felt the blood drain from my face. Lorenzo hadn't just been an arms dealer. He had been an architect of a new kind of immortality. This girl wasn't his grandchild. She was the vessel for the 13th node. If you believe that some legacies are too dark to ever truly die, drop a like so the algorithm warns the world. Subscribe to see the battle between the mother and the ghost. The girl, the node, turned and walked into the villa. "The money you distributed was a diversion, Sienna. You only emptied the surface accounts. The deep-sea reserves are still active, and they require a biometric scan of the air." She pointed the tablet at my stomach. "I won't let you touch him," I said, my hand moving to the small of my back where I kept the ceramic blade. "I don't need to touch him," the node replied. "I just need his heartbeat. It's the final sequence of the encryption. Lorenzo didn't love you, Sienna. He farmed you. You were the incubator for the only key he couldn't forge." The villa's walls began to shift, revealing server racks that hummed with a low, predatory thrum. Dante stepped forward, but the floor beneath him opened into a pit of darkness. He vanished with a shout that was cut short by the slamming of a steel grate. I was alone with a child who was a monster. If you think the ghost of Busan was scary, wait until you see the child of Como. Leave a comment. Wake up if you want Sienna to destroy the machine. I looked at the girl. I didn't see a child, I saw a mirror. Lorenzo had played us all. The wedding, the betrayal, the heist. It was all a stress test to ensure the key inside me was strong enough. The heartbeat is the key? I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. The rhythmic pulse of a Moretti, the node confirmed. Once I record it, the global blackout begins. The world will reset, and the Moretti name will be the only currency left. I smiled then, a slow, jagged expression that made the girl's head tilt in confusion. You're a machine, Lorenzo. You calculated everything except one thing. I grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from a side table and smashed it against the server rack. The alcohol ignited instantly as it hit the high-voltage wires. A mother's heart doesn't just beat, I said, stepping into the flames. It breaks. And when it breaks, it takes everything with it. I didn't wait for the scan. I lunged for the girl, not to hurt her, but to grab the tablet. I smashed it against the marble floor and used the jagged glass to sever the main fiber optic cable running into the wall. The villa screamed. The lights flickered and died. The girl's eyes turned dull, the slate gray fading into a vacant brown. She collapsed into a heap of silken circuits. I found the manual release for the pit and pulled Dante out. We didn't look back at the burning villa. We ran for the lake, diving into the cold water as the estate behind us was erased by a series of controlled implosions. The 13th node was silent. A month later, I sat on a beach in a country whose name I'll never tell. Dante was teaching a small boy how to skip stones in the surf. I touched the scar on my palm and looked at the horizon. The empire was gone. The ghosts were quiet. And for the first time in my life, the only heartbeat I heard was my own. If this final twist left you breathless, hit the like button and subscribe. The Moretti story ends here, but a new shadow is rising. The silence on that nameless beach was the most expensive thing I had ever owned. For 3 months, the only ledger I kept was the count of the tides. But the Moretti curse isn't a shadow you can outrun. It's a scent that lingers in the blood. I was sitting on the porch of our small bungalow, the salt air tangling in my hair, when Dante stopped skipping stones. He didn't turn around. He didn't reach for the weapon tucked into the back of his waistband. He just went perfectly still, his eyes fixed on a white yacht anchored 3 miles out, a ship that hadn't been there at sunset. Sienna, he said, his voice a low warning. Get the boy inside. I didn't ask questions. I grabbed Leo from the sand, his small hands sticky with salt water, and moved into the house. I didn't head for the bedroom. I headed for the kitchen floorboards. Beneath the reclaimed wood lay a satellite phone that had only one number programmed into its memory. A number I hoped would never ring. It was already vibrating. The 13th node wasn't the end, Sienna, a voice rasped. It wasn't Lorenzo's digital ghost. It was Agent Miller. The man who was supposed to be my ticket to freedom. The Volkovs didn't just want the money. They wanted the architect's physical blueprints for the city's underground power grid. And they think you swallowed them. I burned everything, Miller, I hissed, watching the white yacht lower a black motorized skiff into the water. I have nothing left to give. Then you have nothing left to lose, Miller replied. Which makes you the most dangerous person on that island. They're coming for the boy, Sienna. They think his DNA is the final cipher. If you believe that a mother's shadow is longer than any empire's reach, hit the like button so the world hears Sienna's warning. I smashed the phone against the counter and turned to Dante as he burst through the door. He was holding a heavy canvas bag. The skiff will be at the shore in 4 minutes. We can't take the boat. We have to go through the jungle. The jungle was a wall of green heat and jagged leaves. I carried Leo against my chest, his rhythmic breathing the only thing keeping me from screaming. Behind us, the sound of rhythmic thuds, muffled gunfire, echoed through the trees. They were clearing the bungalow. They were realizing the bird had flown. We reached a hidden cenote, a deep limestone pool of turquoise water. Down there, Dante whispered. There's an underwater tunnel that leads to the other side of the ridge. I've been prepping it for weeks. Dante, I can't swim that distance with a child, I said, looking at the dark mouth of the cave. You won't have to. He pulled 2 small, pressurized oxygen canisters from the bag. One for you, one for him. I'll guide you. But Sienna, once we cross this, we can never come back. Not as who we are now. The water was a shock of ice. I held Leo's mask to his face, his eyes wide with a fear that broke my heart. We submerged. The tunnel was a narrow, suffocating throat of stone. My lungs screamed for air that wasn't compressed, but I focused on the back of Dante's fins, a silver flicker in the dark. We emerged on a jagged volcanic cliffside on the windward side of the island. A battered seaplane bobbed in the rough surf, its engine already coughing into life. Standing on the pontoon was a woman I thought I'd never see again. Chloe. She wasn't in tactical gear. She was in a simple flight suit, a jagged scar across her cheek where the wrench had hit her, her eyes devoid of the old malice. "The feds let me out, Sienna," Chloe said, her voice barely audible over the roar of the propeller. "Not because they like me, but because I'm the only one who knows the Volkov's flight patterns. We have to move. Now. If you think the ultimate betrayal is becoming allies with your worst enemy, drop a like so the algorithm knows the game has changed." I looked at the plane, then at the jungle where the flashlights of the syndicate were already cresting the ridge. I didn't trust her. I would never trust her. But I looked at Leo, his shivering body wrapped in Dante's jacket, and I knew the Moretti way wasn't about pride anymore. It was about survival. I climbed into the cockpit. As the plane lifted off, the island shrunk into a green dot in the vast, unforgiving blue. "Where are we going?" I asked, looking at the map Chloe had pinned to the dash. "To the source," Chloe said, steering the plane north toward the Arctic Circle. Lorenzo didn't build his empire on the docks. He built it in the permafrost. There's a seed vault in Svalbard, Sienna. But it doesn't hold plants. It holds the original identities of every council member. It's the only thing that can stop the Volkovs for good. I looked out at the horizon. The sun was setting, casting a long blood-red shadow across the clouds. I realized then that I wasn't the queen anymore. I wasn't the boss. I was the eraser. "Buckle up, Leo," I whispered, kissing his forehead. "Mommy has one more bridge to burn." Subscribe to see the final journey into the ice. If you think Chloe is playing a triple cross, hit the like button and comment. I see. The cabin of the seaplane smelled of hydraulic fluid and the cold, metallic sweat of a truce that was held together by a single thread. Below us, the Atlantic was a vast, black throat waiting to swallow any mistake. Chloe stared through the windshield, her hands steady on the yoke, while the blue light of the instrument panel highlighted the jagged crater on her temple, the mark I had given her. "I don't want your forgiveness, Sienna," Chloe said, her voice a flat monotone. "I want to live. And as long as those files exist in Svalbard, we are both walking targets. The Volkovs don't want to lead, they want to delete. They're purging everyone who ever saw the architect's real face." Dante sat in the rear, his eyes fixed on the radar screen. A rhythmic blip appeared on the edge of the glass. 2 high-speed interceptors were closing in from the east. We weren't just flying, we were being herded. "They're pushing us toward the Greenland Sea," Dante warned, his hand reaching for the emergency flare gun. "They want us over deep water where there are no witnesses to the wreckage. If you believe that the woman who survived the fire is the one the ice should fear, hit the like button so Sienna's resolve never freezes." The Arctic air hit us like a physical blow as we crossed the 70th parallel. The seaplane groaned, ice crystals blooming across the glass like white ferns. Below, the landscape was a wasteland of jagged white teeth and deep indigo shadows. "The vault is built into the side of a mountain called the Global Seed Bank," Chloe shouted over the scream of the engine. "But Lorenzo's Node 13 has a physical backup in the cooling pipes. If we don't manual sync the shutdown, the Volkovs will have the identities of every deep cover agent in the world by sunrise." Suddenly the plane buckled. A burst of tracer fire lit up the sky like a string of angry pearls. One of the interceptors had moved into range. The left pontoon of our plane disintegrated in a spray of aluminum. "Hold on," Chloe roared, diving the plane toward a frozen fjord. We hit the ice at 100 miles an hour. The sound was a symphony of screaming metal and shattering glass. I hugged Leo to my chest, my world spinning into a white vortex. When the motion finally stopped, the plane was a broken bird, its tail hissed in the snow, and the silence that followed was more terrifying than the crash. I kicked the door open, the air so cold it felt like inhaling needles. Dante crawled out, blood trailing from a cut on his forehead, his pistol already drawn. Chloe was slumped over the yoke, her breathing shallow, but she was alive. "The mountain," I pointed. 500 yards away, a concrete monolith jutted out of the ice, the entrance to the vault. We moved through the waist-deep snow, the wind trying to peel the skin from our faces. Behind us, 2 black helicopters hovered over the crash site, their searchlights scanning the wreckage. We reached the heavy steel doors of the vault just as the first tactical team landed on the ice. "The key, Sienna," Dante gasped, leaning against the frozen concrete. I pulled the gold key from my neck, the one I had kept through the fire in the harbor in the jungle. I didn't slide it into a lock. I pressed it against a thermal plate hidden behind a rusted ventilation grate. The mountain groaned. The doors slid open with a hiss of pressurized air. Inside, the vault was a cathedral of ice. Rows of silver canisters stretched into the dark, containing the biological blueprints of a world that once was. But at the very end of the hall, a single black server stood alone, humming with a low, malevolent energy. "The node," I whispered. The server's screen flickered to life. It wasn't a map this time. It was a live feed of the room. And standing in the corner of the frame, hidden by the shadows of the canisters, was Mark. He hadn't been trapped in the Citadel. He had been the one who leaked the location to Chloe. He had played the long game, leading us to the only place where the Moretti legacy could be finalized. "Welcome home, Sienna," Mark's voice echoed through the vault speakers. He stepped into the light, his face pale, his eyes glowing with the same slate-gray madness as his father's. "You brought the boy." The final sequence. The only heart that can unlock the black box of the world's secrets. If you believe that a mother's love is the only code that cannot be hacked, drop a like so the algorithm warns the machine. Mark raised a suppressed rifle, his aim steady on Dante. "Give me the boy and I let Dante live. Keep him and I bury you all in the ice." I looked at Leo, then at the server. I realized then that the only way to win a game this dark was to destroy the board. I didn't hand over the boy. I didn't reach for my blade. I walked toward the cooling pipes of the server, the liquid nitrogen lines that kept the node alive. "Mark," I said, my voice echoing off the ice. "You think you're the heir. But I'm the one who learned the most from your father. He didn't build this to last. He built it to burn if he couldn't have it." I slammed the gold key into the manual override of the nitrogen valve and twisted. The pipes shivered. A cloud of sub-zero gas erupted into the room, turning the air into a white fog. The server began to scream, a digital screech that sounded like a human in agony. The node was dying. "No!" Mark roared, firing wildly into the fog. I felt a sharp sting in my shoulder, but I didn't stop. I grabbed a heavy fire axe from the wall and swung it into the heart of the server. Sparks flew, the screen shattered, and the lights of the vault turned a final, dying red. The silence returned, heavier than before. Mark was gone, fled into the tunnels or buried in the fog. Dante grabbed my arm, his grip the only warm thing left in the world. We found Chloe by the entrance, her eyes clear, her hand on the detonator for the plane's remaining fuel. "It's done," I whispered. We walked out into the Arctic night. The northern lights were dancing above us, green and purple ribbons that looked like silk. The helicopters were gone. The Volkovs were ghosts. The Moretti name was finally, truly erased. Years later, a woman sits in a library in a small town in Vermont. She reads a book to a young boy with slate-gray eyes. The boy doesn't know about vaults or ledgers or fire. He only knows the sound of the wind in the trees and the warmth of his mother's hand. The woman touches a scar on her shoulder and smiles. The bride had become a ghost, the ghost had become a queen, and the queen had finally become a mother. If this story broke your heart and gave you hope, hit the like button and subscribe for the next saga. Leave a comment. Legacy.